Welcome to Stories from Site, the podcast for renovation enthusiasts. I'm Amy Donalik, and together with my co-host Jane Middlehurst, we chat with home renovators about the rollercoaster that is renovation. This week, we chat with a renowned property developer known for transforming homes with creativity and quality. In this episode, Sara shares the challenges and rewards of renovating her own family home, a transformation of a 1950s pebble dash house. Whether you're a budding developer or a renovation enthusiast, this episode offers valuable insights into crafting exceptional homes. So welcome to the podcast, Sara. We're excited to have you. I feel like you might be the most famous person we've had on, actually, as a guest.
Oh my God.
You have 108,000 followers. That's amazing.
I had a couple of viral videos around December, January that rocketed my followers. It's funny with Instagram though, because most of what I do doesn't get out to many of those followers. So it's a funny one.
It's definitely a frustrating platform. You think there's some things that are going to be like, yeah, this one, I think everyone's going to really love. And then you're just like, oh, okay.
Well, I think it's changed so much and everybody's always going on about the algorithm, but I think that changes all the time. Sometimes I have time to create content, sometimes I don't, sometimes I've got lots of stuff going on. It's kind of easy to whack some stuff up. Sometimes it's not so easy, but reels are the thing that, they just take time to create. I never thought I'd be a video editor, but there we go.
Well, I wanted to ask you because people know you from the Corner House, which was voted, I think, Grand Design's House of the Year. On Instagram, you call yourself a digital creator, but you are also a local developer, a property developer. What would you say your title is?
Yeah, I mean, you have to choose from a list on Instagram.
Yes.
That's why I chose digital creator, because it's a digital platform and I'm creating content on there. But yeah, I am a property developer, but I always say to people I do some property development rather than I am a property developer. I don't know why I do that. I think partly because people hear the title property developer and it's almost a dirty word. People kind of have certain slights of saying you're an estate agent or something. I think people just think, oh God, it's just somebody getting in and just kind of creating something horrible and doing it as cheap as possible and then trying to make as much money as possible. Some people might be doing that, but, I do it, yes, to try and make some money. Otherwise, what's the point? But, also to try and create something that I enjoy, sort of that creative process as part of it. That, there's so many other elements to it and it's pretty stressful at times. But yeah, I guess that's my main thing. I don't really ever say to someone I'm an influencer. Then somebody will sort of introduce me and say, oh, Sarah's an influencer. I'm just cringing. Just thinking, oh gosh, it's just, it's not really me. I've never been, from a personal point of view, a social media person at all. I was never on Facebook or any other sort of MySpace back in the day or anything like that. And I wouldn't have really been on Instagram, particularly had it not been for just starting to showcase what I was doing.
I read somewhere someone describing you as kind of breaking that property developer stereotype, and that it's clear that each property is a labour of love and the wonderful results of determination and passion. But I thought that was such a nice summary.
Thank you. And it's true, think that each property is a massive labour of love. I put so much into it, so much of myself into it. I hadn't done my own project for us for 20 years. We bought our old house like 22 years ago or something, and we did that up. I was sort of quite young at the time and we didn't have a huge amount of money. We did it top to bottom. Things were a lot cheaper back then. And then, so we hadn't really done anything to our own place. And then I started doing properties up for other people, basically. And I'd agonise over every decision, thinking, well, you're kind of working for this kind of faceless sort of, who's going to buy this house? You've got the kind of end user in mind. So you're trying to cater to that, but also, do I like it? So kind of catering to my taste, hoping that my taste would be pretty universal. I'd be doing these properties as if I was going to be living there, caring about every little detail and feature. And now I've done my own house. Oh my God, it's like, it's that, but sort of on steroids. Now I'm thinking, well, maybe I'll be a little bit more relaxed about what I do in terms of my developments, because I just can't possibly maintain that. I'll still put a lot into it, obviously, but maybe do I need to do everything completely fresh and new each time? Or can I kind of reuse some of the ideas that I've had before? Before I was always like, right, I just want to try out new stuff every single time. It's exhausting.
If you do multiple projects and multiple properties, you kind of get a bag of tricks that you are testing things out, and some things work well and others don't. You collect those as you go through. And I think that's the natural process of seeing what works for you and what works well in the build. And eventually you'll get to a place where this bag of tricks is big enough that labor of love is more efficient, because you still love all the things. It's just that you've done them before, so you know how it's going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's all the kind of basics, the stuff behind the scenes you need to think about, knowing what the options are for materials and all of that kind of thing, having the whole sample set of lots of different things, materials, tiles, etc. So you have those immediately to go to. Just things like, how I to do paneling and wardrobe doors and stuff like that, I'd kind of to reuse. But then it's about those kind of finishes. It's like, okay, I know what kind of tiles and how I'm going to bring that up the wall and do whatever. But then it's like, oh, actually, should I just use some completely different tiles? And then you're kind of out tile hunting, or, paint colours. So you're going to try out different paint colours, and then it's all the sampling happens again. So, it's all of those kind of end finishes that, you can have fun with and do something different each time.
And also disappear into different rabbit holes.
Yeah, exactly. This new project that I've got that's just started on site, I mean, they're going hell for leather, so much demolition, pouring foundations and stuff. I really need to crack on and finalise what flooring I'm going to use and get those hard finishes, because I know they're going to be wanting to know about level soon. And I've been so focused on our garden, I just keep on putting it off. Normally, I would be so immersed in this project already, but because I've got other stuff going on, I keep on shunting it to the side. But yeah, it's all that planning ahead.
Well, yeah, you must have decision fatigue on just like the biggest, most epic scale.
Well, exactly. So after each project, I'm like, right, I'm just going to have a break, a breather. Towards the end of a project, I've got a finite amount of money is available, so I need to sell to then buy. But as I'm selling, I'm looking, and quite often it's worked out that I'm selling and buying at the same time. But then with the property that I buy, there's normally sort of at least a year, sometimes 2 years of going through the whole planning process, tenders, finding builders and so on. So that's where you kind of have a bit of a breather, I suppose, a natural kind of breather. But, the corner house I finished in 2019. It's now 2024. And obviously I've done our house. The last couple of years have been all about our house. But yeah, there was a bit of a breather there.
Yeah. So tell us about your house. I know it was a 1950s pebble dash home. Can you tell us what drew you to it? What was your vision for it from the outset?
Yeah, so I found it at the same time I found the corner house. So it was like 2017. And we lived in a Victorian house, quite local to here, but had a tiny garden. When we bought it, it didn't matter. We were moving from a flat to being pleased to have some outdoor space. And then we were there for a lot longer than I think we sort of probably envisaged, like 20 years in the end. And we had children there. We had a son who was kind of really keen footballer. And, I just always hankered after having a bigger garden for the kids to run around in. By the time, ironically, we've sort of ended up moving in here, they were 18 and 16 and no longer kicking footballs around the garden and sort of, just out with their friends in the park. So, we didn't actually need a big garden by that point. But I was always looking for something with a big garden and something that we could do up ourselves. Because of doing all the property development, I just wanted something that we could really kind of take back to basics and sort of make our mark on. And then I saw this. It's actually on the same road as the corner house, just further up. I saw immediately on Rightmove the floor plan and the garden size. It's a massive garden. It's really unusual because it's post-war. There's basically 4 houses that are sort of post-war infills, but there's a number missing between them. So there were 5 houses on this plot with 4 houses originally. But it's our 2 houses in the middle, which are semi-detached, where there were 3 houses. Our 2 houses are 1.5 plots wide. So, in London, it's a long garden, but it's not a skinny garden. It's about 8 meters wide. It definitely wasn't the house that attracted me. it was the garden initially. I've been doing, in terms of, doing up properties, extending properties, building new house, well, a new house at that point. I had more of an idea of what might be possible with the house itself. I just thought, well, if we can make the house something bigger and sort of nicer, because the house was for a family of 4, it was 80, 90 square meters. We were moving from a 160 square meter home. If we could kind of double the footprint more or less, which we ended up being able to do, I just thought it's a lovely road. We could have the garden of our dreams in the end. And I knew we'd be able to do something with it. And I think because like 20 years ago, I would never have considered living in a non-period home. I always loved Victorian, Georgian period properties, even though our house didn't actually have any original features. They're just attractive houses. But then having, particularly with the corner house, sort of built a new, very modern house, I just completely flipped and, sort of fell in love with modern architecture just from being much more exposed to it, dealing with architects, absorbing so much material and inspiration around all of that style of architecture. I actually thought I would never have looked at a 1950s post-war house before. Suddenly, I was really open to it and just thought, actually, we could do something really cool with this. And, it would be a modern house.
Amazing. So how did it go? Because I remember that maybe the planning process was rather protracted, shall we say. Was that the trickiest part of it?
The actual getting the planning permission was pretty straightforward. What happened was trying to get the design of the outside of the house in particular was really hard. And so I was working with an architect initially who's absolutely lovely. We'd been to see his house in Camberwell, and that's kind of how I found him, and, absolutely great. But it was just proving really hard to get the exterior, what to do with the exterior of the house. Because once you take the pebble dash off, then, sort of what can you do with, it's not like they're Victorian bricks underneath. So you have to cover them with something. And I never wanted render. That was one of my early stipulations. What have we ended up with? Lime render. But, anyway, we just couldn't get the outside right. So in the end, we spent a lot of time, and then COVID happened. We'd have to have Zoom meetings rather than in-person meetings. So it's a lot harder to kind of go through things. So in the end, I just said, no, let's just go to planning, because we could spend so long going around in circles about getting the outside of the house right, and planning could just turn around and say no anyway. So let's go and try and get the massing, and the volume, because we were adding a heck of a lot on. We were going back with a double story, a whole new story on top of that. And we did it in 2 tranches to do with community development and planning. And we got it through both times, both elements first time. So we got all the massing that we wanted. I think my mistake at that point was saying to the architects, look, this is proving so difficult. Maybe we should part ways, and I'll go to someone else now and see if I can get the outside of the house right. So I went off to someone else, and long story short, I ended up going through 3 or 4 different architects. And the outside of the house, if I'm really honest, I'm a little disappointed with. It's fine, but it's render. I wish I'd stuck to my guns and said no render. It's a lime render, and we sort of, brushed it back to reveal the aggregate. So it's a bit different. It looks amazing close up, but from a distance, it just looks pretty brutalist. And I think so the shape of it all, it's lots of boxes. I just think maybe there could have been something more interesting we could have done with that. So we ended up going back into planning probably a further 3 times or something to slightly change the shape of what we had up the top and what have you. So that's why all of that took a really long time. We probably ended up spending like 1.5 years going back and forth with planning. I had one planning application to do it as a total knockdown new build. Maybe we should have just gone with that in the first place. But I think actually because we were going back in and sort of doing things in increments, if we'd gone in with what we ended up with in the first instance of planning, they might have balked at it because it was kind of incrementally, we were adding things on. We got everything through each time. But yeah, it was a really difficult process. And we ended up not having an architect working with us when we were on site. So we just never had that kind of architect. And it's so ironic because I always said with this house, I really wanted proper architect involvement to make it a real kind of architect designed house, interior and exterior. I ended up sort of on my own on the interior. But once you walk through the door, actually, that's the stuff that I am really happy with. And the outside is fine. Some people look at it and they're like, oh, it's great. I look at it and I just think it's not exactly what I envisaged and had in mind, But
I'm just looking at it now, actually. I think it looks amazing. You've taken the top of the window and there's just like a slight change in the render, which I think really helps with that. But also the timber cladding.
So the timber cladding I love, it's great. And then we've carried that around on the fences now, sort of on the patio in the garden. We use a product called CUX, which, Instagram's been so helpful for me as well, just with research, and I found that on somebody, I think, sort of messaged me on Instagram. That is one of the big advantages, like going the other direction, for me, being on Instagram and having a big following. If I put questions out there, I have so many responses from people. People are so helpful. Whereas obviously if you were just an individual, there's just nobody there to kind of come back and answer stuff. So I found this product CUX through that, and it's fantastic because it preserves the wood. It has to reapply for 15 years. The thing with wood is it weathers in a non-uniform way, depending on where the sun goes on it. With this, it just keeps the whole of the wood completely uniform, accelerates the weathering all uniformly, to sort of this end finish that you're going to sort of end up with, lovely, in my case, creamy white colour. And it protects the wood, keeps it looking fantastic. So I love the cladding. And that line, so that was part of the detailing with the render to have a shadow gap at window header level. My brief was all about, I just want it to be subtle detailing. I don't want anything so too flashy. It has ended up being very subtle. But that was kind of this datum that sort of runs around the building at window header level.
Yeah, beautiful.
That difficulty with the process, was it because it was your own house? Was it just that much more pressure or a different building type or less constraints? Can you pinpoint the difference between the processes you'd been through before and this one?
I think the building type made it quite difficult. It's just how it was stepped and everything at the front and what we were dealing with. But now, when I look back at some of I think you just get so sort of entrenched in it, and it becomes almost kind of quite difficult to then say yes to anything because you've seen so much that you're sort of not happy with. You then lose a bit of trust. And when I now look back at some of the iterations that the original architect came up with, I'm like, oh, why didn't I go with that? Actually, what was wrong with that? That was actually, that would have been great. So, I blame myself as much as anyone. I think I was sort of being quite a difficult client. And I just got into this kind of circle of I think I'd lost faith and trust.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of difficult to say yes to anything.
Well,
You're employing an architect because they know best, really. I knew what I didn't like, but I didn't know what was possible. Anyway, do you know what? It's fine. And now that we're doing the front garden, that's kind of bringing it to life, actually, because now there's some greenery out there, sort of, a couple of tall trees. It looks it looks lovely.
but it must be difficult, just the personal element to it. Because I actually thought the corner house, you had lived there. Because I think that comes across, just the kind of personality and the care comes across in that development. But I guess the pain of decision making, I don't think we've really talked about it before, but it's so hard to kind of close off. And I think that's possible to do when, you have that tiny bit of distance that you're doing it as a development. But when it's your own house, I can just imagine that that's just really tricky.
Absolutely, because, I kind of felt like it wouldn't be any harder than doing the developments. I put so much into those and I agonized over decisions. I was thinking, like, in a way, doing our house would be easier because it was for us. I know who the end client is. It's me, it's my husband, it's our kids. It's not some imaginary couple or family, who might be buying the place I'm doing up. So I kind of naively, I think, thought it would be easier. It's so much more difficult because you're going to have to live with those decisions forever, potentially, for as long as you're in that house. So there's so much more weight on all of those decisions when you're doing it for yourself. So, you kind of agonize over them even more. But I guess coming back to the earlier point, this is why people employ professionals, why interior designers, we add value. I'm somewhere kind of in between because I have done quite a few projects. So I have got that bag of tricks. I have got that knowledge of the things that you need to be thinking about, the things that I can deploy, those kind of tricks that can work. It's so much of it is about knowing the order of things, like knowing what the possibilities are, knowing who lots of the suppliers are, knowing how to mix and match materials and so on. I've done a lot of that, and that kind of thing makes it a bit easier, smooths the way for some of those decisions. But yes, there's still so many decisions. And I always say to people, especially towards the end of a project, decision fatigue is such a reality, but you've just got to kind of keep going, because I think people can tend to give up and be like, oh, God. Right, well, yeah, we'll just do that. And so they make mistakes towards the end of the project that then they really regret because they just couldn't face spending time, sort of making those final decisions. And it's almost like they gave up and it didn't matter anymore. And it does matter. You are going to be living with it for however many years. So you just have to keep yourself motivated, keep the energy levels up and keep it going with that end in sight.
Did your family provide a good sounding board for the process, or were they kind of happy to follow your lead?
No, my family, it's a combination of, it's not really fair to say lack of interest. The kids' lack of interest completely. Interest in a sort of slightly annoying way. They're not really interested, but they'll kind of offer up an opinion just to make my life more difficult. Husband, not that he's not interested. He is interested. He's very interested in what I'm doing and is very proud and supportive and all the rest of it. But I suppose he just knows that he doesn't have the knowledge or the expertise. So he will 100% just defer to me, which is fantastic in some ways because, I speak to people and they're like, oh, yeah, my husband just really, wants this, that and the other and like really get involved. And you have to kind of cater to their opinions, which can be really annoying unless they've got good taste. But on the other hand, for me, especially because I didn't have an architect kind of on board, it's literally just me kind of, having to go round and round and round in circles about so many things all on my own. But then I will drag Pete in and my husband and ask his opinion about stuff. And, if he actually does have an opinion between three things, I've been agonizing over them, then I'm like, okay, great. Well, let's just do that then, because actually all three would probably be okay. It's just like at least someone's got a stronger opinion one way than the other.
I think it's interesting as a creative person, you have an eye for design. And I think sometimes for people who are creatives, that transition period at the end of the project of the vision that you had and the reality that you now have, I think there always is that lag at the end of a project where your mind is kind of adjusting and accepting this new reality. And I see it so often in projects, and it only affects some personality types or clients. And it is just this bedding in. And then I think after a few months, or maybe a year, maybe 2 years, it can take time. You look back at the things that you were worried about and you just don't see them anymore.
Oh, absolutely. I'm definitely that personality type. And having been through that myself before, I've told myself, get over it, Sarah, you won't notice it in X amount of time. And I tell people that I do consultations with that as well. But, just, I'm trying to think what stuff here is kind of besides the outside of the building, which I'm kind of settling in with now. But actually, there's not much inside. I was going to do a reel actually on not regrets, but kind of, is there anything that I would change around the house? There's like 3 or 4 things. There's sort of our picture window where our window seat is, and I agonized over the format of that window, whether to have just nothing opening, sort of, frameless, big piece of glass. I was like, oh, but this is south facing, it's going to get hot, be nice to be able to open that. Just double windows that, you could open the whole thing. That was what I was going to go for. And then in the end, I stupidly did this compromise thing where I had a much smaller window that would open and then sort of a big rectangle of glass, thinking, well, that's my picture window, but there's a bit that will open on the side. And it's absolutely fine. Nobody would say anything, but I wish I'd gone with the whole thing could open up, because that would be amazing. So there's like maybe 2 or 3 things around the house like that, mainly to do with how doors open. So mostly sort of inside, there's not many regrets, but I totally know what you mean. When you do have things, you're like, oh my God, that's going to really annoy me. But within a few months, you kind of don't notice it.
And what are you most proud of?
I think it's like sort of the back like partly so the whole kind of kitchen kind of open plan area just works so well, and it genuinely changes how our family kind of live and interact. It's amazing that a physical space can, something that's basically sort of bricks and mortar, can sort of have that emotional impact. We've got teenage kids who a few years ago retreated to their bedrooms, never to be seen again. And our daughter, she's 16, just turned 17, just hangs out downstairs so much now. It's really lovely. I mean, maybe it's her coming out of her sort of teenagerdom as well, but she'll bring her work down, do it at the kitchen table. She'll lounge and watch stuff on the sofa, on the big TV. Yeah, no, it's really lovely. And just the space we have compared to what we had in our old kitchen, because we never did a side return. So it was like sort of the typical kind of back Victorian sort of narrow, long kitchen. So I think, yeah, it's kind of that feeling of space. I think the other thing is all the joinery. We invested in some nice joinery, but it was all stuff that I envisioned, sort of designed, and then worked with a couple of joiners to create. And it's just made such a difference to the spaces as well. So I'm kind of pretty proud of that.
I was just thinking from, obviously, as you are a developer and you have experience with buying and selling homes, from a financial aspect, you wanted to double the size of the house. You've obviously done a really high spec, beautiful project. Has it worked financially? Will the amount that you've put into the project pay back? Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I think when we bought the house and when I started thinking about, going out and talking to architects, I was like, right, this is the kind of budget we've got. And this was pre-COVID, and thinking like, well, that's, compared to what I've spent sort of elsewhere, that's a good, healthy budget. Then COVID happened and we started building after that. And that budget was not a big, healthy budget for the kind of extent of building work we were doing. So the project did end up costing a lot more than we originally planned. I'm pretty good at kind of keeping a tight handle on budgets on my developments. If I spend a bit more somewhere else, I'll try and sort of rein it back in somewhere else. So I've never gone massively over budget on my developments, but here, being for us, it was like, if we really want that thing, okay, let's just spend a bit more on that, and a few times of spending a bit more on that does mount up.
Well,
So we definitely sort of, overspent. I guess we were sort of lucky that, it wasn't like we had a totally finite pot of cash like we've had in the past when we did our first house up. So we were fortunate to be able to make those decisions. I have an estate agent friend who has been round for a drink and obviously done the tour. And, she's kind of given me an indication of what she thinks it would be worth resale wise. I don't think it would be worth quite that much, but, even if it was worth a little bit less than that, we're sort of, there's some equity still left in the property. So I think it's been worth the spend, yeah. From a just purely financial point of view, obviously it's been worth the spend to create a space that we love to live in as well. And the other thing that I always say about this house and modern houses is the comfort level is insane. We were in a drafty, freezing cold Victorian house before. This house is so well insulated. It's so toasty and warm. It's just comfortable living here through the winter. It's just been lovely. We've got underfloor heating all downstairs, but we've barely had to have the heating on, to be honest. It just maintains the heat. It's really good. So that's definitely a big plus, kind of tick for me for modern house living.
yeah, that's amazing.
Do you have any advice for people who want to do property development, but making the property well designed, better functioning, delivering something better to the world, which I feel like you're doing one property at a time? Is there any advice you can give to people who want to kind of venture into that space?
I mean, gosh, yeah, there's probably millions of things. I think when I started, I was quite naive and very lucky. So, there's a lot of sort of crunch points when you're doing this. And the things, it's high risk because there's a lot of money involved, I mean, there's sort of all sorts of angles that I've never kind of really explored. Like you buy an option on something, and then sort of try and get planning and then, I've never done that, negotiated that, whatever. So I've literally bought outright and then had to go and try and get planning. But you do your background research and understand what is the planning policy in the local borough and what's got planning before and so on. But when you're pushing the boundary a bit, if there's maybe not something exactly the same, that it's not like you're just doing a standard loft conversion or a side return. So when I did the corner house, which I was wanting to build right up to the pavement boundary, anytime I saw something that was a new build that had done that, or even, properties that had been extended to the side, Victorian houses maybe being built right up to the boundary, I just made a note of all of them so that I could put all these precedents into my planning application. But I think I was just really lucky, so with the planner that I got who thought my corner, he would go back to the design lead within the council and be like, well, actually, I think this, this and this. Whereas I think nowadays in planning departments, there's so many young graduates with very little experience. They're just like, oh, yes, well, I'm sorry, I've been told this. The design person says this. The conservation person says this, and they just, there's no dialogue, there's no kind of them having an opinion and sort of pushing back. So, sorry, it's a bit long, convoluted kind of answer, but I think it's knowing your stuff, making sure you do the research. The way to really add value is to add floor space. That's kind of what I look for. Is there somewhere that I can add floor area and convert into flats? Or is there somewhere where I can build something new, but even that, just for example, in Southwark, there's like new policies coming in all the time. I nearly got caught out on it. If you're creating any new units, there's a whole new, basically, sort of tax that has been brought in. As soon as you're creating new units, you have to pay X amount per kind of square metre. It destroys any profit. So it's, I have to say, it's becoming harder and harder to find plots, to find something that is a development, unless you're a medium to big developer where you've got people out there sourcing plots that then you can build like sort of 20 houses on or whatever. It's one-off individual plots that don't carry a huge amount of risk to do something with.
It's so sad because that's basically the government's housing policy, is build new houses on urban infill sites. The people who do one project at a time, like you're the creative top end of development at its best. And I think that comes from the individual, doesn't it? It's less likely to happen in a big, huge building company. And so they're kind of quashing that inspirational side or the entrepreneurial side for the smaller developer.
I'm just imagining a plot of 30 of your houses. I feel like there'll be lots of people who would want to live there.
That would be great. If anybody wants to come and sell me that. But yeah, I mean, I'd say, if you can find a good, just a flat that if you extend it from a 1-bed to a 2-bed or something, there's kind of quite a big jump up in value between a 1-bed and 2-bed. Or, if you can change a house from a 3-bed to a 4 or 5-bed. The problem with those is you're up against end users who, are happy to kind of pay more money always for it than a developer would be, because they're not looking for profit out of it. So, people do find stuff, but it is hard.
Yeah.
Well, I think you've done amazingly well, and we absolutely love your work. I absolutely love it. And
thank you.
Your house is so beautiful. Thank you for chatting about the whole process.
No problem.
And if you would like to see photos of Sara's home, then please head to our website at homenotes.co/stories from site. We'll see you next time.